The conference room had glass walls on all four sides. I had walked past it 100 times without giving it much thought. But that Thursday morning, sitting on the wrong side of the long table, I finally understood why it was built that way. Every person on the sales floor could see straight in. Every reaction, every flinch, every moment of weakness, all of it on display. My boss, Derek, sat across from me with his hands folded neatly on the table. Carla from HR sat beside him, staring down at a folder she hadn't opened once since I walked in. My security badge was already sitting on the table between us. I hadn't placed it there. Someone had lifted it from my desk before they even called me into the room. "We're letting you go, Brooke," Derek said. "Effective immediately. Company restructuring." The word restructuring landed in the room like a heavy stone dropped into still water. I looked at the badge. Then at Derek. Then at the badge again. 7 days. My largest commission in 4 years was exactly 7 days away. $240,000 I had spent 18 months earning. One cold call, one warehouse visit, one patient conversation at a time. And Derek was smiling. Not politely. Not professionally. Like a man who believed he had just won. The smile was the part that stayed with me. Not the firing itself. I had been in corporate sales long enough to know that jobs could end for reasons that had nothing to do with performance. I had watched good, talented people get walked out of buildings before. I knew it could happen to anyone. But Derek's smile was different from anything I had seen in all those years. It wasn't relief. It wasn't even plain smugness. It was the specific, calculated look of someone who believed they had just outplayed a person they had never taken seriously. He leaned back slightly in his chair, the way people do when they feel completely in control of a room. Carla finally glanced up from her folder. Her expression was flat and professional, giving nothing away. She slid a single sheet across the table. A termination document already signed by Derek, dated 2 days earlier. I picked it up and read every word slowly. Not because I needed to understand the legal language, but because I refused to give Derek the reaction he was sitting there waiting for. My hands were perfectly steady. My face was calm. But inside, my mind was already doing something Derek couldn't see from his side of the table. It was calculating. Because in the exact same moment he believed he had outwitted me, I realized something he clearly had not considered. He had just made the single biggest mistake of his career. And he had absolutely no idea. Let me go back to the beginning because the rest of this story doesn't make sense without it. My name is Brooke Whitman. I had been a senior sales executive at Keller-Price Solutions for 4 years by the time of that Thursday morning. For most of that time I was steady and consistent. Never the loudest voice in the room, never the one putting motivational quotes in my email signature. I showed up, I worked, and I delivered. Keller-Price sold enterprise logistics software. Our target clients were mid to large manufacturing companies that needed stronger systems to manage inventory, supplier contracts, and shipping operations. It wasn't a glamorous product. It wasn't an easy sell. I was good at it because I listened far more than I talked, and I never made a promise I couldn't back up. For 3 solid years I was a reliable but unremarkable performer. Then 18 months before that Thursday morning, I was handed an account that the entire division had already given up on. An account that had failed 3 times before I ever touched it. Harrington Manufacturing. $4.8 million if we could close it. The largest single deal in our division's history. The kind of contract that could change a career overnight. My boss Derek handed it to me with a smirk I recognized even then. Not a vote of confidence. An invitation to fail just like everyone before me. What he got instead changed everything that followed. Harrington Manufacturing was built by one man and run by that same man for 31 years. Thomas Calloway had started the company in a rented warehouse in rural Ohio with 12 employees and a single supply contract. By the time the account landed on my desk, he had 400 employees across 3 states and a reputation in our industry for being nearly impossible to work with. Not because he was cruel or unreasonable. Because he was extraordinarily careful. Thomas had been badly burned by a vendor years before I came along. A software company had oversold a system that crashed completely during his peak shipping season and cost him over $1 million in delayed orders and lost contracts. He had rebuilt from it slowly. But he had not forgotten. From that point forward, he approached every new vendor relationship the same way, with deep, patient skepticism that wore out most salespeople before they ever got close. Keller-Price had pitched Harrington 3 times before I was assigned the account. The first rep oversold features that didn't exist yet. The second pushed for a close before Thomas was ready. The third collapsed so badly it nearly produced a lawsuit over misrepresented data. By the time the account came to me, Harrington wasn't just a difficult lead. It was a minefield that no one in our division wanted anywhere near their quarterly targets. My manager told me to give it a shot, without any genuine belief that I would succeed. I studied every failed pitch before I made a single call. I didn't walk into Harrington with a pitch deck. I walked in with questions. That first meeting was supposed to be a 30-minute introduction call on a Friday afternoon. I had scheduled it with full expectation that it would end early. Thomas had a known reputation for cutting meetings short the moment he lost interest, and he lost interest quickly with people who wasted his time. Instead, he talked for 90 minutes. Not about software. About his company. About the supply chain disruptions that had cost him 2 significant contracts in the past 3 years. About a junior account manager from a previous vendor who had made specific promises and then quietly disappeared 6 weeks after the contract was signed. About how exhausted he was of being handed off to a new representative every 6 months, having to re-explain his operation from scratch each time. I didn't interrupt. I didn't try to steer the conversation toward a product demonstration. I took notes on paper instead of a laptop because I had read in the internal call notes from a previous rep that Thomas disliked people typing while he spoke. He felt it meant they weren't truly listening. Small things like that mattered enormously to him. By the end of that first call, Thomas hadn't committed to anything. But he had done something no one from our company had ever achieved. He invited me to visit the facility in person. In 4 years of attempts, not one of our reps had received that invitation. That was where it began. I flew to Ohio on my own money the first time. Our department's travel budget had been frozen that quarter due to a company-wide cost review. I could have waited for approval. I could have spent 3 weeks chasing exceptions through email chains and budget committees. Instead, I booked the flight myself, packed a carry-on bag and arrived at the Harrington facility on a Tuesday morning in February. The cold outside was the deep, biting kind you get on flat farmland with nothing to slow the wind. The warehouse floor was colder still. Thomas met me at the entrance himself, handed me a hard hat and a pair of steel-toed boots from the rack near the door, and walked me through the entire operation for 2 solid hours without a single mention of our software. He pointed out where shipping delays happened, where orders got lost in the manual tracking system, where his team was still running spreadsheets built in 2009 that nobody fully understood anymore, including the people using them daily. He wasn't asking me to fix anything. He was testing whether I would pretend to have answers I didn't have. I didn't pretend. When I didn't know something, I said so directly. When I recognized a problem I had seen before, I said that too, carefully, without overselling what I could do about it. At the end of the walk, Thomas said exactly 6 words. Come back when you have something. I came back 4 months later. In between, I did things no other rep had done with this account. I called Thomas's operations manager, Phil, once each week. Not to sell anything, just to understand the business better. I sent Thomas 2 industry reports I found that connected directly to problems he had mentioned, each time with a short handwritten note. No pitch attached. No agenda. I also spent 6 weeks working with our engineering team to build a customized integration model designed around Harrington's specific inventory structure. It wasn't easy. Our engineers weren't excited about it. But I had told Thomas the first would come back with something real, and I intended to mean that. The second visit ran 4 hours. This time, Thomas brought 2 members of his leadership team into the room. Phil and Vera, his finance director, a sharp and methodical woman who asked questions that made even our best engineers uncomfortable. I had anticipated most of them beforehand. For the ones I hadn't, I said clearly, I don't have the exact answer right now, but I'll get it to you in writing by the end of the week. And then I did exactly that every time. After the meeting, Vera turned to Thomas and said in front of me, "She's the first rep who showed up actually prepared." Thomas nodded slowly. It wasn't a yes yet. But it was the closest thing to one I had seen on this account. The deal was beginning to breathe. The third visit was when Thomas told me about the clause. We were 10 months into the relationship by then. He had agreed in principle to move forward with Keller-Price, and the legal teams were trading contract drafts back and forth. Everything was moving slowly. Thomas's lawyers were extremely thorough, but it was moving in the right direction. One afternoon he called me directly on my cell phone. Not an email. Not a message through our company system. My personal number, which I had given him early on and told him to use at any time. I want to add something to the final payment section, he said. Before I release the last payment, I want your personal sign-off that the implementation went the way we agreed. I asked him to clarify exactly what he had in mind. It means if you tell me it's done right, I'll pay. If someone else tells me it's done right, I'm not comfortable with that. You built this. You're the one I trust. He wasn't asking for a legal technicality. He was telling me clearly and directly that his trust lived with me, not with the company logo on my business card. I told him I would have our legal team included in the final draft. Derek barely read the clause when I sent it through. He approved it in the same email thread where he was complaining about the length of the contracting timeline. Fine. Whatever gets it signed. He had no idea what he had just agreed to. The deal officially closed 11 days before my termination. $4.8 million. The largest contract our division had ever landed. Derek sent a congratulatory email that had been CC'd to 6 other people and taken him roughly 40 seconds to write. 1 week later, I was on site at Harrington for 3 days running the implementation kickoff alongside Thomas's operations team. Everything was on schedule. Every deliverable was exactly as promised. I flew back on a Wednesday evening. Thursday morning, I was called into the glass conference room. The final payment, $1.2 million of the total contract value, was due to be released in 7 days, once implementation milestones were formally confirmed. My commission on the full deal was just under $240,000. Under Keller-Price compensation policy, an employee had to be actively employed on the scheduled payout date to receive payment. Derek knew this policy. He had approved the compensation structure himself when the deal was first assigned. He terminated me on a Thursday morning. The payout date was the following Thursday. 7 days between those two events. That was not coincidence. That was not restructuring. That was a calculation made by a man who believed he had found a clean, airtight way to keep the money the company owed me while making it look like an unrelated business decision. He thought his plan was untouchable. He had completely forgotten about the clause. I packed my desk without making a scene. That was a deliberate choice, not just a reflex. Every instinct I had in that moment wanted to say something out loud, to name exactly what Derek had done with the whole sales floor watching through the glass. But I had spent 18 months training myself to be patient when patience was genuinely harder than reaction. I was not going to throw that discipline away in a parking lot moment that would change nothing. I placed my personal items into a cardboard box, one at a time. A framed photo. A small succulent plant I had kept alive on my desk for 2 years. A notebook full of handwritten client notes that I had taken during dozens of meetings. Carla from HR walked me to the elevator. She looked deeply uncomfortable the entire way, which told me she was fully aware of what the timing meant and did not feel good about it. At the elevator doors she said quietly, "I'm sorry, Brooke." I nodded and pressed the button. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 11 minutes. I didn't cry. Instead, I made a mental list. Every person I needed to call, every document I needed to locate, every clause in my employment contract I needed to read again carefully. Then I called Nate, a lawyer I knew personally. Not to sue anyone yet. Just to understand what my options looked like if the situation moved in that direction. Knowledge first. Everything else after. That was the only way through this. 48 hours after my termination, my phone rang. Thomas Calloway. I had not contacted him. I had made a conscious choice to wait and see what Keller-Price would do next before I said a single word to anyone on the client side. Whatever happened after this point, I needed it to come from them, not from me. "Brooke," Thomas said. His voice was measured, but there was something tightly controlled underneath it. "I received a reassignment notice this morning. Someone named Brandon is apparently my new account director." Brandon had joined the company 8 months earlier. He had never met Thomas. He had never set foot inside the Harrington facility. He had not been on a single call related to the account. Why wasn't I told about this directly? Thomas asked. I chose my words the same careful way I always had with him, without spin, without softening, without adding anything that wasn't true. "I'm no longer with the organization," I said. "I was let go 2 days ago. I wasn't made aware they were planning to transition the account this week." Silence followed. Long enough that I checked the screen to make sure the call was still connected. Then Thomas said, I see. 2 flat words. The quiet that comes before a decision has been made, not after. I appreciate you being straight with me, he said. Of course, I replied. I'll be in touch, he said, and the call ended. I sat very still and waited for what came next. 3 days passed. During that time I heard nothing from Keller-Price. No follow-up from Derek. No email from Carla. Nothing from the legal team. They had moved on, or at least they believed they had. On the 3rd day my former colleague Priya sent me a text message. She worked in the finance department and had always been honest with me. Her message was short and carefully worded. Final payment from Harrington hasn't cleared. Finance is confused. Thought you should know. I didn't respond immediately. I sat with the information for a while first. Then I wrote back, thanks for telling me. Nothing else. No questions. No speculation. I simply let the information settle where it was. Thomas called again that same afternoon. I've been reviewing the contract closely, he said. The final payment clause has my full attention now. I understand, I said. Are you in a position to confirm that the implementation was completed in accordance with our original agreement? It was a direct question. But the weight behind it was enormous. If I said yes without reservation, the payment could move forward. If I raised any concern at all, it could not. I thought about what Derek had done. I thought about the smile across that table. I thought about the 7-day calculation. Then I thought about Thomas. About 18 months of honest work with this man. I told him the truth. There are implementation details I personally oversaw. Without being part of the ongoing process, I can't verify continuity. That single sentence set off a chain reaction I had anticipated but didn't take any pleasure in watching unfold. Within 24 hours, Thomas formally paused the final payment, citing a need for a full relationship review. He sent the notification directly to Keller-Price Contracts team. He also copied the board of directors. I learned about the copy through Priya, who sent me a single question mark in a text message. That one character told me everything I needed to know about the level of panic now running through the building. The final payment, $1.2 million, was tied directly to the company's 4th quarter earnings projection. Without it, the quarterly numbers fell apart. Leadership bonuses disappeared from the table. Stock performance metrics started to slide in the wrong direction. Derek had fired me to avoid paying $240,000. In doing so, he had placed $1.2 million in immediate jeopardy. That was the worst trade I had ever seen anyone make in 4 years of corporate sales, and the math behind it was now sitting on a board presentation. My phone rang that evening. Derek's number on the screen. I watched it ring until voicemail picked up. He called back 20 minutes later. Same result. I wasn't ready to speak to him. Not because of anger. I had moved well past anger somewhere around day 1. But because I had absolutely nothing useful to say to him yet. The situation was doing all the talking that was needed. Derek emailed me the following morning. The subject line read, "Quick clarification." No apology anywhere in the body. No acknowledgement of the termination, the timing, or the commission he had deliberately tried to take. No reference to the fact that he had walked me out of the building 1 week earlier while the whole floor watched. Just a vague, carefully professional-sounding request for what he called transition support on the Harrington account. The client is requesting some documentation, he wrote. Would you be available for a brief call to assist with the handover? 7 days ago I was being escorted to the elevator with a cardboard box. Now I was being asked to assist. I read the email twice, closed it, and did not respond. Later that same day, Thomas's office sent a formal letter to Keller-Price legal department. It reiterated that the final payment clause required account director approval. It also noted that the account director had been terminated without proper transition protocol, which raised serious concerns about implementation continuity and the overall integrity of the contractual agreement. The letter was copied to the board again. Priya texted shortly after, "It's bad in here. Emergency calendar invite just went out for tomorrow morning. Nobody will say what it's about, but everyone already knows." I was sitting in my apartment with a cup of tea and a plain notepad, doing something Derek had not once considered. I was doing nothing at all. And doing nothing was the most powerful move I had. A week after the termination, Thomas called me a 3rd time. This time he asked me to come in person. "I'd like to talk," he said. "Not specifically about the payment clause. About something else." I drove 2 states to his office without asking what it was about first. Thomas was not someone who explained things over the phone when he could say them properly face to face. I had understood that about him since our very first meeting. The drive gave me time to think, not about the commission which I had made a quiet internal peace with somewhere in the middle of the week. The money might simply be gone and I had accepted that possibility. What I could not accept was Derek's version of events becoming the only story anyone heard. I arrived at the Harrington facility mid-morning. Thomas met me at the front entrance the same way he always had. No fanfare, no assistant leading the way. He walked me up to his office, which looked out over the main warehouse floor through a wide window overlooking the full operation below. We sat. He poured 2 cups of coffee without asking whether I wanted any. That was simply Thomas. "I've told my team to pause everything with Keller-Price," he said. "I heard," I replied. "I want to be direct with you. That decision wasn't made to help you personally. It was made because I don't do business with companies that operate this way." "I know," I said. "I respect that." He studied me for a moment then nodded. "I'm reconsidering the entire contract," Thomas said. My stomach dropped and I want to be honest about that. I had not fully anticipated this. I had expected him to be deeply unhappy with Keller-Price. I had not expected him to be prepared to walk away from a software transition that was already 40% into its implementation phase. A reversal at this stage would cost him real money and significant time. It wasn't a threat. It was a considered business decision. "That's a significant step," I said. "Yes," he agreed quietly. "But I've made significant decisions before when the relationship underneath the contract stopped making sense." He folded his hands on the desk in the same way he had the very first time I sat across from him, when he had spent 90 minutes talking and I had simply listened with a notepad. "I've run this company for 31 years, he said. "I know when an organization values a contract more than it values the person who created it. And I know exactly what that tells me about the next 5 years of working together." He let those words sit in the room for a moment. "I don't invest millions of dollars in companies," he said. "I invest in people. You are the person I chose. That person is no longer there." I had nothing to say to that. He was right and we both understood it. "There's a folder," he said, sliding something carefully across the desk toward me. I reached for it slowly. Inside the folder was a 2-page document. At the top, Director of Strategic Partnerships, Harrington Manufacturing. I read it once. Then I read it again from the beginning. The role was not a rescue and Thomas made that plain before I could react. He explained it the way he explained everything, directly with no unnecessary softening around the edges. "I need someone who understands this business from the inside out. Someone my team already trust. Someone who can build and manage future vendor partnerships the way you built this one." The compensation structure was significantly stronger than anything I had earned at Keller-Price. A higher base salary. Performance equity with no ceiling on growth. No commission structure at all. Instead, a genuine share in the results I helped produce over time. "I'm not asking you to decide today," he said. "I'm asking you to take it seriously and give me a real answer when you're ready." I kept my expression composed. Inside, I was working through something much larger than a job offer. I was thinking about the 18 months behind me. The flight I paid for myself. The cold warehouse floor. The clause Thomas had insisted on that Derek had barely glanced at. I was thinking about how clearly and accurately this man had seen my value, when the people I had worked alongside every single day had not. "I'll take it seriously," I said. He nodded once. That was all he needed from me in that moment. We finished our coffee and I drove back across 2 states with the folder sitting on the passenger seat beside me. Back home I called Nate and walked him through the full picture. He listened without interrupting once, which was how I knew he was treating it with real weight. When I finished talking, there was a short silence before he responded. "The termination timing is genuinely ugly," he said. 7 days before payout, with clear written documentation that active employment was required to receive it. A good employment attorney could build a strong argument around that. "I know," I said. "But I'm not sure that's the fight I want to be in." "Because of the offer from Harrington?" he asked. "Because of principle," I said. "Derek did what he did. The consequences are already happening without any action from me. I don't want to spend 2 years inside a legal process for money that may already be overtaken by something better." Nate was quiet for a moment. That's a mature position, he said. I'll support whichever direction you choose. I appreciated that he didn't push me either way. Over the following week, I thought carefully through every angle of the Harrington offer. The stability it represented. The equity structure. The fact that what I built there would belong in meaningful part to me, rather than commissions that could be stripped away by someone with better timing and fewer scruples. I also thought about what it meant to go somewhere that had come looking for me because of genuine trust, not in spite of anything. I called Thomas on a Monday morning. I'm interested, I said. Let's talk through the terms. While I was negotiating with Thomas, the situation inside Keller-Price was collapsing in slow, visible stages. Priya kept me updated in short, careful messages. She wasn't trying to betray anyone she still worked with. She simply believed I had a right to know what was happening, and she was honest enough to act on that belief. The board had formally requested a complete account of the Harrington situation. Derek presented it as a standard restructuring decision that had produced unexpected friction with the client. The board was not satisfied with that explanation. Someone, Priya didn't know who, had pulled the termination paperwork and laid it directly beside the commission payout schedule. 7 days. In plain writing. The math was impossible to explain away. The board pressed Derek to account for the timing specifically. He tried to frame it as coincidence. They did not accept that answer. The audit expanded outward from there. They examined Derek's handling of several other accounts over the previous 2 years. They found a pattern, not of anything clearly illegal, but of decisions that consistently prioritized small short-term savings over the long-term relationships that actually sustained the business. A formal performance review was opened. None of this required a single public statement from me. I had not approached the board. I had not spoken to any journalist or industry contact. I had not posted anything anywhere. I had not even shared the full story with most of the people who had reached out to ask. The truth had surfaced entirely on its own, the way it tends to when the paperwork is honest and the numbers don't bend. I signed my contract with Harrington Manufacturing on a Tuesday morning. Thomas's office was exactly the same as it had always been. Orderly, functional, no unnecessary decoration anywhere. The contract was 12 pages long. I read every paragraph before I picked up the pen, which Thomas watched with what I recognized as quiet, genuine approval. When I finally set the pen down, he extended his hand across the desk. "Welcome," he said. That was the entire ceremony. No speech. No celebration. Just the handshake and the single word, and then we moved directly into a discussion about the first project already waiting for me. I was no longer a sales executive managing commission targets. I was director of strategic partnerships, responsible for evaluating, structuring, and overseeing every significant vendor relationship Harrington entered into going forward. It was exactly the kind of work I had been building toward without ever having the language to name it. My first week, I met individually with each department head at the facility. I approached every one of those meetings the same way I had approached Thomas from the very beginning, with a notepad, not a laptop, and more questions than statements. Phil, the operations manager who had watched me navigate the warehouse floor in borrowed steel-toed boots nearly 2 years before, shook my hand firmly at the start of our first official meeting. "Glad you're on this side of the table now," he said. That one sentence meant more to me than the contract had. I had gone from being locked out of something I'd built to being the person holding the keys. 2 months after I signed with Harrington, I heard that Derek had left Keller-Price. There was no farewell email sent to the company. No announcement posted on LinkedIn. No going away gathering in the break room. Priya told me in a text, "He's gone. Official statement is stepping down to pursue other opportunities." Nobody believes it. The board had completed their review. I never saw the full findings, but Priya told me the Harrington situation had been at the very center of everything. The termination timing. The commission avoidance. The resulting loss of the largest contract in divisional history. The full exposure delivered directly to the board without any mitigation plan in place from Derek. The financial picture was brutal. He had tried to save $240,000. The company lost $1.2 million in final payment. They also lost the entire renewal pipeline, which Thomas's team estimated would have generated another $3 to $4 million over the following 5 years of the relationship. All of it traceable in a straight, unbroken line, back to one single decision. made by one man in a glass conference room who had leaned back in his chair and smiled. I did not feel triumphant when I heard he was gone. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was something quieter than triumph. A kind of clarity. The same feeling I had experienced the day I first read the clause Thomas had insisted on and understood that relationships built on genuine trust carry a weight that no termination letter can simply overwrite. 6 months into my role at Harrington, the company announced a national expansion. Thomas had been planning it quietly for over a year, the way he planned everything important, methodically and without making noise about it until the foundation was completely solid. New distribution centers across 3 states. New regional supply partnerships. New vendor agreements that needed to be structured with the same care and integrity the company had always required. I was at the center of building all of it. My days looked nothing like my years at Keller-Price. There were no quarterly commission ceilings making every client conversation feel like a race against a calendar. No internal politics around who received credit for a closed deal. No manager in the back of the room calculating what a signed contract meant for his own bonus number. Instead, I was building systems, frameworks, relationships designed to grow and last well beyond a single contract cycle. I created what I began calling an integrity clause template, a standard section I recommended for every major vendor agreement Harrington entered into. It required clear written transition protocols in the event a relationship manager changed. It required documentation of all verbal commitments made during the sales process. It required that any vendor who failed to deliver on specific promises in the first year would face real financial consequences, not just a polite email. Thomas reviewed the template and approved it without changing a single word. "This is exactly the kind of thinking I brought you here for," he said simply. I thought of Derek when he said it. Not with anger. With something much closer to gratitude. Near the end of my first year at Harrington, I sat down quietly and did the math. My equity stake in the company's growth, based specifically on the expansion partnerships I had structured in the first 6 months alone, had already exceeded the $240,000 commission Derek had tried to keep. Not in base salary. In equity. In a real growing share of something I had helped build from the inside. I was not adding up the number to make a point to anyone. I wasn't going to call anyone to tell them. I was simply sitting at my desk one Tuesday evening, working through a quarterly performance report, and the figure appeared clearly in one of the columns on the page. I stared at it for a moment. Then I closed the report and went home. There was a version of this story where I spent that entire year in active combat. Where I retained attorneys and fought publicly for the commission and poured enormous energy into making Derek the named villain at the center of an ongoing legal battle. Some people would have done exactly that. And some people would have been completely right too. But I had made a different choice, and that choice had led somewhere the other path simply couldn't. I had not fought to take something back from someone who had taken it. I had stepped aside and built something new on ground that was entirely mine. And unlike a commission, no one could terminate me 7 days before it paid out. I thought about the glass conference room sometimes. Not obsessively. Not bitterly. More the way you think about a turning point in your life when you're finally far enough past it to see the full shape of what it was. Derek had chosen that room deliberately. The glass walls were a message. A public termination designed to demonstrate authority. To show the sales floor that no one was untouchable, that the company could remove any person at any time and continue forward without missing a step. He had miscalculated almost every single part of it. He had assumed I would respond with anger and become reactive. I became calm and methodical instead. He had assumed Thomas Calloway would accept a generic reassignment email without question. Thomas had never once in 31 years of business operated that way. He had assumed that the 7-day timing was clever enough to be invisible. The board found it transparent the moment anyone looked directly at the paperwork. He had thought he understood the full value of what he was removing from the equation. He didn't. Because the real value of what I had built with Thomas over those 18 months was not in the software itself, or the contract language, or even the commission check. It was in every single time I showed up exactly as I said I would. The flight I paid for out of my own pocket. The cold warehouse floor. The patient questions. The honest answers when I didn't know something. That kind of trust does not transfer with a reassignment email. Derek discovered that the most expensive way possible. And I learned that the strongest thing you can carry into any room is not leverage. It is character. A year after the glass conference room, I found myself standing in a room with glass walls again. This one was completely different. It was the new Harrington boardroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the expanded warehouse floor 3 stories below. From where I stood, I could see the 3 new shipping lines we had added during the national rollout. Workers moving with a steady, practiced rhythm that told you the system was working exactly as it was designed to. Thomas was presenting the year-end results to his senior leadership team. When he reached the partnership section of the report, he paused and looked directly at me. In the past 12 months, he said, we've added 6 major strategic vendor agreements that reduced our operational costs by 11% and increased our shipping accuracy to 97.4. Every one of those agreements was structured by Brooke. He didn't say it as a compliment. He said it as a fact stated for the record. Which was better. After the meeting ended, I drove home along the same highway I had used to reach Harrington during those early visits, almost 2 years before the deal ever closed. Past the same flat farmland. The same wide gray Ohio sky, though the air was warmer now than it had been on those first trips. I thought about what the journey had actually cost, not in money but in patience. In restraint. In the repeated quiet choice to stay steady when noise would have felt so much more satisfying. And I thought about something simple that had turned out to be completely true. When you truly know your value, you don't need anyone else to protect it for you. You just make sure you build on ground that which belongs to you. So you never would have the need to raise your voice.